Located about 13 kilometers or about 8 miles off the coast of Cape Town, South Africa, is a place steeped in history, and it serving as a microcosm of South Africa's turbulent past. Welcome to Robben Island. Over centuries, it transformed from a barren island to a notorious prison, and now to a symbol of resilience and a World Heritage Site. Robben Island's history stretches back millions of years to its geological formation. Its rise as an island was a result of tectonic shifts and sea level changes during the Ice Age, which separated it from the mainland. Long before human intervention, it was home to a rich variety of wildlife, including seals, penguins, and seabirds. The indigenous Khoi and San peoples of southern Africa, the region's earliest known human inhabitants, were aware of Robben Island but likely avoided permanent settlement. Archaeological evidence, such as stone tools and shell middens found on the mainland near Cape Town, indicates that these communities had sophisticated systems of resource use and navigation. While they were skilled seafarers who could navigate the waters of Table Bay, the island's isolation, lack of fresh water, and harsh weather made it an unlikely site for habitation. The cold and treacherous waters surrounding the island were filled with strong currents and sharks, further deterring frequent visits. The first recorded contact with Robben Island by Europeans occurred during the Age of Exploration in the late 15th century. Portuguese explorers, under the leadership of Bartolomeu Dias, rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1488, opening a new maritime route to India. Dias and subsequent explorers noted the island in their logs, but their encounters with it were cursory. By the early 1500s, another Portuguese explorer, Antonio de Saldanha, Portuguese sailors named the island for its abundant seal population, using the word Ilha das Robas, which translated to English meant Island of Seals. It later evolved into Robben Island, under Dutch influence, which means Seal Island. The island served as a natural barrier and navigation marker for sailors approaching the Cape of Good Hope. Its proximity to the mainland meant that it was visible from the shores of what is now Cape Town, making it an easily identifiable landmark for early mariners. However, the very same waters that made it a useful waypoint also made it dangerous. Shipwrecks were common in the waters around Robben Island, leading to its infamy among sailors as both a navigational aid and a perilous obstacle. Later, during the Colonial era, this led to the construction of lighthouses to reduce accidents, but in the early centuries, the island's hazardous reefs and unpredictable winds were a constant threat. The colonial era marked Robben Island's transformation into a site of banishment, exploitation, and human suffering. Initially seen as an isolated and inhospitable outpost, the Dutch and later the British recognized its potential as a secure location for exiling political prisoners, indigenous leaders, and other undesirable groups. The island's natural resources, particularly seals and stone, were also exploited during this period. Its dark history during these centuries laid the groundwork for its later notoriety. In 1652, Jan van Riebeek established a supply station at the Cape of Good Hope under the Dutch East India Company. The company sought to ensure the station's security and maintain order among the indigenous Khoi and San populations who resisted the encroachment of settlers on their land. Robben Island quickly became a tool for suppressing resistance. Outsumato, a Khoi leader and intermediary between the Dutch and local tribes, was one of the earliest notable prisoners. Outsumato initially cooperated with the Dutch, assisting with trade and language translation, but his growing opposition to their exploitative practices led to his banishment to the island in 1658. Remarkably, he managed to escape, one of the few to do so in the island's history. As Dutch control expanded, Robben Island became a dumping ground for those deemed politically or socially disruptive. This included indigenous resistance leaders from regions beyond the Cape, such as the Indonesian prince Tuan Guru, exiled in 1780 for his opposition to Dutch colonial rule in Southeast Asia, including Indonesia, Malaysia, and Java. Tuan Guru, who was a Muslim scholar, left a lasting legacy on South Africa, introducing Islamic teachings to the Cape's growing slave population. Today, you will find a kramat on the island, which was built in honor of Sheikh Madura and the Islamic peoples who lived on the island. In 1795, the British seized the Cape Colony from the Dutch, temporarily transferring control of Robben Island. Although the colony briefly reverted to Dutch control in 1803, it was permanently annexed by Britain in 1806 following the Napoleonic Wars. The British continued the Dutch policy of exiling indigenous leaders and other political prisoners to the island. By the mid-1800s, leprosy was spreading among the Cape's population. The colonial authorities viewed Robben Island as an ideal location to isolate leprosy patients, segregating them from the mainland population. Conditions on the island were harsh. Patients were often sent there against their will and received little medical care. Social stigma compounded their suffering, and many spent the remainder of their lives on the island, cut off from their families. In the 1840s, Robben Island began housing individuals with mental illnesses, reflecting the colonial government's tendency to isolate those deemed undesirable. The asylum's conditions were bleak, with limited understanding or humane treatment for mental health issues. The British expanded the island's infrastructure, building new prison facilities and enhancing its use as a leper colony and asylum. This period also saw the construction of the island's first permanent structures, some of which remain standing today. Robben Island's use during the colonial era set a precedent for its later role as a prison during apartheid. Its transformation into a site of political repression and exploitation foreshadowed the suffering endured by anti-apartheid activists. By 1931, Robben Island's leper colony and asylum were closed as the South African government centralized mental health and leprosy treatment facilities on the mainland. This marked the end of its role as a place of medical exile and the beginning of its transformation into a prison focused primarily on criminal and political incarceration. The establishment of apartheid in 1948 marked a turning point for Robben Island. The National Party government implemented laws that institutionalized racial segregation and criminalized political opposition, using the island as a key site for imprisoning activists. In the 1950s and 1960s, Robben Island was repurposed into a high-security prison for political prisoners. Anti-apartheid activists from movements like the African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress, and the South African Communist Party were detained on the island for their roles in resisting apartheid policies. The infamous Rivonia trial of 1963 to 1964 saw key ANC leaders, including Nelson Mandela, sentenced to life imprisonment and sent to Robben Island. The apartheid regime subjected prisoners on Robben Island to severe physical and psychological hardships such as forced labor, inhumane living conditions, and racially segregated treatment. Prisoners were forced to work in limestone and slate quarries under brutal conditions. The limestone dust caused long-term health problems, including respiratory issues and permanent damage to eyesight, as prisoners were not provided with any form of protective gear. Political prisoners were deliberately isolated or grouped according to perceived threat levels and race, thus minimizing opportunities for collaboration. Even within the prison, apartheid policies prevailed. Black inmates, who were referred to as Bantus, were given different foods compared to colored, Indian, or other racial groups, who were all referred to as Asians. Bantus were offered puzamandla, which was a mixture of a drink that was used in the mines in South Africa, and many believed that it made the people stronger. However, this meal was actually provided to make the inmates impotent, so that once they were to leave the island, if they ever did, they would not be able to procreate, as the government did not want them having offspring who would also fight against the apartheid government. Asians, on the other hand, were provided with bread and jam. This too was not a healthy meal and did not help them to remain healthy either. The clothing provided to each group was also very different, with Bantus having to wear short pants, short-sleeve shirts and no shoes. Asians were provided sandals, long-sleeve shirts and long pants. But their white counterparts who were working as prison guards on the island were given decent meals, clothing and housing. Nelson Mandela, who would eventually go on to become the first democratically elected president of South Africa, was imprisoned on Robben Island from 1964 to 1982. He became a central figure in maintaining morale among inmates. Alongside other ANC leaders like Walter Sisulu and Govan Mbeki, Mandela used his imprisonment to strengthen the movement for liberation. A part of the island ironically became known as the University of Robben Island by the inmates as they educated one another in history, law, and political theory. The university can be found in a small cave on the limestone quarry. Robert Sobukwe, the founder of the PAC, was held in solitary confinement on Robben Island from 1960 to 1969 under a special law known as the Sobukwe Clause, which allowed indefinite detention without trial. Sobukwe's isolation was so extreme that he was kept in a separate house and forbidden from interacting with other prisoners. Sadly, in early 1977, Sobukwe became seriously ill. In September of that year, Sobukwe traveled to Johannesburg, where he was diagnosed with lung cancer and was later moved to a hospital in Cape Town for further treatment. While the South African authorities allowed him to receive medical attention, they imposed stringent conditions on his movement, requiring him to check in with the police whenever he left Kimberley or visited the hospital. Sobukwe succumbed to complications from the cancer on the 27th of February 1978 and was laid to rest in Graaff-Reinet on the 11th of March that same year. Despite all the harsh conditions faced by the prisoners, they found ways to resist through acts of solidarity, such as hunger strikes, secret communication, and smuggling of banned materials. By the 1970s and 1980s, Robben Island had become a global symbol of apartheid's cruelty. News of the conditions on the island and the imprisonment spurred international condemnation. Exiled South African activists and international organizations such as the United Nations and Amnesty International drew attention to the plight of Robben Island prisoners. Campaigns for their release became central to the global anti-apartheid movement. Inside South Africa, protests against apartheid intensified. The Sharpeville massacre in 1960 and the Soweto uprising in 1971 highlighted the regime's violence, galvanizing both domestic and international support for the struggle. Nelson Mandela was transferred from Robben Island to Pollsmoor Prison in 1982 and later to Victor Verster Prison in 1988. His release in 1990 symbolized the dismantling of apartheid, and it also signaled the beginning of the end for Robben Island as a prison. Following Mandela's release, other high-profile prisoners were freed, including Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, and Ahmed Kathrada. These releases marked a significant step in the reconciliation process. By 1991, the last political prisoners were released from Robben Island, and it ceased to operate as a prison. The end of its use as a site of repression marked the conclusion of its darkest chapter. After its closure, Robben Island was left in a state of disrepair. The facilities, which had housed thousands of prisoners over the years, were abandoned as the government debated its future. Nelson Mandela, who had spent 18 years on the island, emphasized the importance of preserving its history. After his inauguration as South Africa's president, he revisited the island. His return highlighted the profound journey from prisoner to president, reinforcing the island's place in the national consciousness. In 1997, the Robben Island Museum was officially founded. The museum aimed to preserve the island's historical structures and artifacts while sharing the stories of those who had been imprisoned there. In 1999, UNESCO designated Robben Island as a World Heritage Site. UNESCO also described the island as a place of memory, healing, and reconciliation. One of the most unique aspects of Robben Island tours is that they are often led by former political prisoners. These guides share first-hand accounts of their experiences, providing visitors with deeply personal and moving insights into the island's history. Their stories bridge the gap between the past and present, fostering a deeper understanding of the sacrifices made during the anti-apartheid struggle. Nelson Mandela's former prison cell, located in Block B, is one of the most visited sites on the island. The stark simplicity of the cell, with its thin mat on the floor and small window, is a powerful reminder of the harsh conditions endured by prisoners. You can take a boat trip to Robben Island from V&A waterfront in Cape Town. The ferry departs from the Nelson Mandela Gateway, which is located at the V&A waterfront and offers daily trips to the island. The cost for a round-trip ferry ticket to Robben Island is typically around 400 South African rand per person for adult locals, and 600 rand, about $35 for adult internationals, depending on the time of year and ticket availability. There may be discounted rates for children, South African citizens, and residents. Prices can also change, so it's a good idea to check with the official Robben Island website or authorized ticket vendors for the latest rates. The boat ride to Robben Island takes approximately 30 to 40 minutes each way, depending on sea conditions. The ferry ride offers great views of Cape Town, Table Mountain, and the island itself as you approach. Once you arrive on the island, visitors usually take part in a guided tour of parts of the island, and it includes a visit to the former prison, as well as a visit to the cell where Nelson Mandela was held during apartheid. The whole experience typically lasts around 3.5 to 4 hours, including both the ferry ride and the tour. World leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens visit Robben Island to pay homage to its historical significance. Figures such as Barack Obama have highlighted its enduring symbolism during their visits. For South Africans, the island serves as a reminder of their collective history and the sacrifices that made democracy possible.